Fed Chairman Powell, I believe, has no intention of being written about in history books as blowing up the American dream. Because in the last 3 years, more money has been created in the last 3 years than in the entire history of the country before. The majority of that money that has been created, or a good portion of it, went into assets where hedge funds can borrow $1 billion at 1%, plow it into equities, plow it into real estate, plow it into cryptocurrencies, make a fortune, pay off the loan with no problem at all, make huge bonuses. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is a massive distortion in asset prices. You could call this the crack-up boom in Austrian economics, where massive expansion in credit and lowered interest rates create distortions and misallocations of capital and resources where price discovery is next to impossible. Houses are doubling or tripling in a year. Equity portfolios the same. Cryptocurrencies up 10 times. You've been in finance longer than I have, and you know that's not how markets work. They don't go parabolic like this. And I think a lot of it has to do with the distortions and the misallocations that were created through massive money printing. So I think Fed Chairman Powell has no intention of blowing up the system and getting tough on inflation. The National Bureau of Economic Research came out with a report not too long ago and said that the 9.1% inflation that was listed in July of this year would have been 16.5% if calculated it the way that they used to in 1980. Like you said, John Williams of Shadow Stats, a legend in this industry, all he does is show the numbers the way that the Fed and the Bureau of Labor Statistics used to calculate numbers. But even if we believe the 9%, by the way, that CPI excludes food, energy, and housing, right? So they pulled out the things that we need that are inflating to give us this now 8.5%. So he says he's getting tough on inflation and raising it to 2.25%, maybe to 3.25% at the next meeting. What good does that do against 8.5% inflation, which we know is probably closer to 17%? What getting tough on inflation is what Paul Volcker did under the same situation, only when they calculated inflation truthfully.
Right.
Inflation at 16 or 17%, what did he do? He raised the federal funds rate to 19.75%, blew up the economy and blew up inflation. Powell, on the other hand, getting tough on inflation, he's pussyfooting. He raised it to 2.25% with 9% inflation. That's a negative 7% plus real return, negative. That's not getting tough on inflation. And what is so unusual about the environment we find ourselves in? Stocks, bonds, and real estate at all-time highs are what? Inversely correlated to a rise in interest rates.
Right.
So if he raises rates, he knows it's a religious experience in this country for everyone who considers themselves wealthy in traditional assets. This is why they're pussyfooting and raising the rates just little by little. This is why the quantitative tightening that they were talking about hasn't happened. They were going to do $80 billion a month in treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. I think to date, over the last 4 months, they've only done 50, 60 billion off their balance sheet. They're not selling off their balance sheet, and they are in fact not raising rates, getting tough on inflation. They're not, right? Because he doesn't want to be written about in books. So I ask you, as I go on to mile marker number 4, were the consequences of this action intended or not? And I want you to think of what Klaus Schwab said in 2019, that there'll be a great reset, that you'll own nothing, and you'll be happy to rent. Now, when he said that, I thought he was an idiot. But when we get to the end of what I'm talking about here in 2022, we're going to reflect upon that. And so I don't think that he's going to do it. He's not going to get tough on inflation, but how about we create a villain? Because, you know, our president is already telling us that inflation has nothing to do with historic money creation and everything to do with Putin, right? Well, inflation is always 100% of the time a monetary event, always. And when you throw in unproductivity in the equation, it exacerbates the effects of inflation. And that sounds like the last 3 years. Massive money creation, paying everyone to sit on their couch, play video games, and eat bonbons. So you have more money chasing less stuff because no one's producing anything. They're sitting on their couch. So that's the cause of inflation. It has nothing to do with Putin. It has everything to do with the Federal Reserve that has blown up, and a government that has blown up our money supply and incentivized people to be unproductive.